today's video, I want to talk about the glory of God. In the original language, the word glory means weight. It is a measure of something or someone. And every person on the planet has a glory about them. There is a way to measure a person. If I was to take you and just literally dissect every detail about your life, the way you loved, the way you hated, the way you spoke, the things that you looked upon, the things you listened to, the way you treated people, people's knowledge of you, people's understanding of who you are as a person, the way you live your life, everything would be a measure of your person. That would be the glory of you. And that is with everyone on the planet. We all have a glory about us. But you see, I want to talk about the glory of God, the measure of who He is. Because I think that that's where our evangelism needs to go. Our teachings, the way we live our life, everything ought to be done for the glory of God. You see, if our teachings would be God-centered, where everything that we teach about and preach on and evangelize about would be the measure of God Himself, then it would cause men to feel small, and it would cause God to be great. Because when we begin to speak of the greatness of God, it devastates man as a person. And it causes man to see his great need for God Himself. That we are literally lifeless. We cease to exist apart from God. That is how desperate we are for the person of God. Because if it was not for Him, then we would not exist. And so why is everything in our life not centered around the person of God? The way I speak should be for the glory of God, the measure of who God is. The way that I treat my wife, the way I treat my children, the way I speak to others, the way I do my job, everything that I do should be for the glory of God. When I eat my food, it should be for the glory of God because I'm literally receiving it from Him. And so if you took everything that has ever been created, the oceans, the fish in the oceans, every creature that creeps upon the face of the earth, the birds of the air, beasts of the field, men, grass, everything, and you was to put it on a scale, there would be a weight to it. And that weight would be great. But once God stepped onto that scale, then the balances would be changed. It would be as though nothing at all was on the scale besides God Himself, because there is absolutely nothing that compares to the excellency and the wonder of the majesty of God. When we speak of God, do you ever think of who it is that we are speaking of? We are speaking of the one who has created the heavens and the earth within 6 days, and on the seventh day He rested, that spoke everything into existence. The one who has measured the rivers, the seas, the great lakes, the streams, every bit of water on the earth in just the hollow of His hand. Scientists say that the universe is eternal, that there is no end to it. But the scriptures declare that God Himself can take by His thumb to His pinky, and by the span of His hand, He measures the universe. And He asked this question. He said, the heavens and the earth cannot contain me, because He's so vast. He's so big. And He says, who is man? Or who is this that's going to build a place for me to dwell? And yet this God that I speak of dwells in us. We have become His temples. But let us go to the scriptures, and I want you to see what the glory of God will do to a man, to a person, if we only declare the glory of God. Because you see, in today's evangelism, men are made so great and God is made small. In today's world, it is as though men do not need God, but rather God need man. And that's not how it is at all. So I want to read just briefly through some passages of where God Himself begins to measure the person of God to men in the Bible. And I want you to see what happens. And this is why it should be so important for all of our life, our teachings, our evangelism, everything, our studies, to be centered on the person of God and His glory. It should take center stage of everything that we do. In Job 38 verses 1, I'm going to start there. And I'm just going to kind of summarize through some of the things that God is speaking to Job. We're going to start in Job, verse 38. Then the Lord answered Job out of a whirlwind and said, who is this that darkeneth my counsel by words without knowledge? Gird up now thy loins like a man, and I will demand of thee, and you will answer me. So Job was speaking of things that he did not understand, questioning the person of God, as though God ought to answer him. And here God shows up on the scene after listening to Job's complaints and listening to his friends' complaints against Job. And this is what God does. He does not condemn Job in any way, but what he does now is he begins to measure himself against the person of Job. And he speaks of things that are so far above Job, because the Word of God declares to us that the ways of God are as far above our ways as the heavens are the earth. They go on. It's a measure that goes beyond the understanding of man. And so this is what God tells Job, or asks Job. He says, where were you whenever I laid the foundations of the earth? Declare it, if you have the understanding. And who has laid the measures thereof, if you know? Or who has stretched a line upon it? Whereupon are the foundations thereof fastened? He says, have you commanded the morning since thy days, and caused the day spring to know his place, that it might take hold of the ends of the earth, that the wicked might be shaken out of it? Have you entered into the spring of the sea, or hast thou walked in the search of the depth? Have the gates of death been opened unto thee, or hast thou seen the doors, or a shadow of death? Hast thou perceived the breadth of the earth? Declare it, if thou knowest at all. He's declaring to Job the things that no man really knows. He does not know because he was not there, because men are finite. Even the angels in heaven are finite. They have limitations just as we do. But yet God is without limitations because he can do all things. The Bible declares to us that God can do exceedingly abundantly above all that we could ever ask or think. And so here God is measuring himself to Job and declaring his righteousness, his glory, who he is before Job. And I want you to see what it does to Job as a person. In chapter 40, starting in verse 1 of Job, it says, moreover, the Lord answered Job and said, shall he that contendeth with the Almighty instruct him? He that reproveth God, let him answer it. Then Job answered the Lord and said, behold. So Job's telling God, he says, look at me. He says, I am vile. What shall I answer thee? I will lay my hand upon my mouth. Once I have spoken, but I will not answer. Yea, twice, but I will proceed no further. So Job seen the measure of God, and he was devastated as a man, seeing that there was absolutely nothing that he could do apart from God, because he had seen the glory of God. He had merely heard of the glory of God, and it devastated him as a man. And in Job chapter 40, starting in verse 10, this is what God says to Job. He says, deck thyself now with majesty and excellency, and array thyself with glory and beauty. Cast abroad the rage of thy wrath, and behold every one that is proud, and abase him. Look on every one that is proud, and bring him low, and tread down the wicked in their place. Hide them in the dust together, and bind their faces in secret. Then will I also confess unto thee that thine own right hand can save thee. So God is telling Job things that he knows that is absolutely impossible with Job. You see, God, when he comes to man, God is not timid. He's not shaken by our thoughts, by our anger or our rage. You know, if we was to go to a person that we knew was angry with us, we might feel timid. But that's not how God is with man. Nothing on the face of the earth can cause God to become startled, because he knows that there is absolutely nothing that can stand in his presence and live. And you see, God asked Job rhetorical questions, things he knew for sure that Job knew the answer to, and yet he knew that Job had no power in doing so. Did you hear what he asked him? He says, if your right arm can save you, then I will confess to you. Save him from who? God was saying to Job, if your right hand can save you from me, then I will confess to you. And Job said it himself. He says, I am vile. He knew that he was nothing but dust, and yet that's all we are, is dust. In Isaiah chapter 6, verse 5, I want you to see here Isaiah seeing the glory of God, seeing God sitting on his throne, and listen to what happened. Then said I, woe is me, for I am undone, because I am a man of unclean lips, and I dwell in the midst of a people of unclean lips. For my eyes have seen the King, the Lord of hosts. Do you see what happens when men see the glory of God? When they see the person of God and his excellencies, in all of his wonder, it causes a man to become undone and causes a man to see man for who they really are, apart from God. We are vile and we are wicked apart from God himself. And the word undone in this passage of Scripture in Isaiah, it means to be devastated. Isaiah looked upon the person of God and he was absolutely devastated. He was void of everything in self. You see, all of our doing and all of our being, every part of who we are, ought to be God-centered. It ought to be for the glory of who he is. Let me ask you this. It's a question that I heard another man ask. What is God more like? The angels in heaven or a bacteria floating in your commode? Now to you that might be two major extremes, because they are. To compare the angels of heaven to a bacteria floating in your commode, they're both unique in themselves, and they are both vastly different. But yet neither of them are like God, because there is absolutely nothing like him. He is separate from everything. In Isaiah, when the angels are declaring the holiness of God, holy, holy, holy is the Lord of hosts, the word holy means separate. It means cut in its most basic meaning. So God is separate from everything that we know. And so we have not experienced anything like him. And I believe this is why the angels are continuously singing about the uniqueness of God, that there is absolutely nothing other that is like him. You see, when Moses was asked by God to go and deliver the people of Israel out of Egypt, and Moses said, "Who do I say sent me?" God said, "I am that I am has sent you." If God would have searched for anyone like him, he could not have pointed to anyone and say that I am like them. But 2,000 years ago, if Moses was to stand before God and say, "Who shall I say sent me?" he would point to the person of Jesus Christ, and he would say, "I am like him." You see, there's nothing really unique about us like there is about God, because there is only one of him, but there's about 8 billion of us. But God can point to no one and say, "I am like them." And that should cause us fear, because we have never experienced or encountered one like him. That's why every time someone encounters him, like Isaiah, they are undone. That's why when someone encounters him like Job, they feel vile, because the light of God and the glory of who he is measured against the person of that individual. And they end up seeing their need for God, and their ability to even exist is found in the person of God. And that's why men like John the Revelator fell dead at the feet of Christ as he beheld the glory of God, because there was absolutely nothing like Christ in his glorified body. He had never looked upon anything so great before in his life. And so I pray that this provokes you to want to get to know God. His desire is for you to know him, to be intimate with him. This God I spoke of, who we will never fully grasp, I don't believe, even through all eternity, because he's so vast. I think that that's why he created a place for us to be in eternity, because it will take an eternity for us to even begin to grasp the fringes of the garments of God and how great he is. But his desire for you is that you might know his love that he has for you. You see, it's because of him and what he's done for us that we will make it, not because of us. Because like I said before, like God said to Job, if your right hand can save you, then I will confess to you. We must know as a people that what we must be saved from is God. Because God is going to, the Bible declares to us that God is going to inflict his fury upon man like man has never seen. And yet we will escape that because of Christ. And so I pray that you will rest in the finished work of Christ and understand that the law brings about death, but the Spirit brings about life. And understand, God is not looking for a better version of who you are. He's looking for Christ in you.